From the media district adjacent, it's time to take another deep plunge into the issues and topics that face Burbank. Let's see what we have on the plate to dissect today.
Hello, Burbank. Craig Stewart here with you once again, and today we're going to do a deep plunge into the 910 South Mariposa project that the City Council will be dealing with on November 26th on the SB35 streamlining process, which basically means they have no choice. They will have to approve this, but we thought we'd give you the information involved in the process so you can hear about the project as it stands. So let's join our friends John and Jenny from Notebook LM to take a deep plunge into 910 South Mariposa.
Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive.
I'm excited to be here.
Me too. And today we're going to sunny Burbank, California.
Sounds nice.
Yeah, to take a look at this newly approved housing project called Mariposa Gardens.
Interesting.
Yeah, you sent over some pretty interesting documents for this one.
Oh, yeah.
We have excerpts from the Burbank City Council resolution, a staff report with tons of details, and even a biologist report.
Wow.
Yeah, so it seems like we're going to uncover a lot about those 40 condos planned for 910 S Mariposa Street.
Yeah, this project really highlights, I think, some of the key issues in housing development today.
Absolutely. Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, I have to point this out.
Yeah.
The project site is currently a horse boarding operation.
Really?
Yeah, horses in Burbank.
Huh.
It's not something you see every day.
Not really.
No. So that was interesting to me.
Yeah.
But it might seem a little unusual, but I guess it just speaks to how cities evolve over time, right?
Yeah, for sure. And what's really interesting here is how this project was approved under Senate Bill 35.
Right, SB 35.
Yeah, exactly. SB 35, that California law that's all about fast-tracking housing approvals, especially for projects that include affordable housing.
Right.
And this one does. It actually got a 100% density bonus because of it, which bumped up the total units from 20 to 40.
Wow.
I'm curious to see how that strategy, the density bonus, is playing out in Burbank compared to other cities.
That's a really good question. Actually, I hadn't even considered that.
Oh, yeah.
So we should definitely look into that. I'm already seeing from these documents how much thought goes into these projects.
Yeah, for sure.
There are a lot of moving pieces.
Absolutely.
For example, the staff report mentions that they need a height waiver to go above the 40-foot limit.
Oh, interesting.
Is that common in Burbank?
Yeah, it is pretty typical, actually, especially in denser urban areas where land is, really valuable.
Yeah.
Building a little taller lets you fit more units on the same piece of land. So it's one way to address the housing shortage. But it also raises all these questions about how those taller buildings impact the existing neighborhood.
Yeah, you've got a point there. I
Yeah.
can see how that could be a concern for residents.
Yeah.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting to me. This project needed approval from two different indigenous bands.
Oh, wow.
The Fernandeño Tataviam Band of Mission Indians
Yeah.
and the Gabrieleño Band of Mission Indians Kiz Nation.
Interesting.
And there's a whole protocol in place if human remains or artifacts are found during construction.
Wow.
That level of cultural sensitivity isn't something you'd necessarily expect in a housing development, is it?
It's becoming more common, I think, and it's a really positive step. It reflects, I think, a growing recognition of the importance of respecting Indigenous heritage and involving tribes in the development process right from the start.
Makes sense.
Which, it's not just checking boxes. It's about ethical and culturally sensitive practices.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that. It seems like they're really trying to be mindful of the history of this land.
Yeah.
And speaking of mindfulness, the design requirements for this project are surprisingly specific.
Really?
The staff report actually mandates early California rancho imagery,
Interesting.
like wide eaves, adobe-style walls, and even those red clay roof tiles.
Huh.
It's making me picture like a modern-day hacienda.
Uh-huh.
But there's a reason for that, right?
Yeah, Burbank, like a lot of cities, has these design standards to make sure new developments complement the existing architectural landscape.
Right. So it's all about creating that sense of visual continuity and preserving what makes the city unique.
Exactly.
So like they're trying to weave the new into the fabric of the old.
Yeah, I like that.
But I'm curious, though, how do they balance those aesthetic goals with the need to create affordable housing?
That's a good question.
I mean, those rancho-style details probably don't come cheap.
Right.
Do they ever end up driving up the cost of construction?
That's a really important question. It's this constant balancing act. While those design elements do contribute to the city's character, they can sometimes add to the cost of construction,
Right.
and that can potentially affect the affordability of the units. So it's a trade-off that cities have to grapple with.
Right. It's a good reminder that even with the best intentions, there are always going to be compromises and tough decisions to be made.
Yeah.
We're just scratching the surface here, but I'm already seeing how complex this whole process is.
Oh, absolutely. We've only just begun to peel back the layers. There's still so much to explore, especially when it comes to the environmental considerations for this project.
You're right.
Yeah.
We haven't even touched on the sustainability aspect. Let's dive into that next and see what they're doing to minimize the environmental impact.
So you're curious about the sustainability aspect of Mariposa Gardens.
I am.
One of the things that really caught my eye was this low impact development plan, or LID plan, as they call it.
Right.
Have you had a chance to look that over at all?
I did. And to be honest, I'm still a little fuzzy on the details.
Oh, yeah.
It's all about managing stormwater runoff, right?
Right. Yeah.
But how does that actually work in practice?
Well, it's a pretty fascinating approach.
Yes.
Think of it as mimicking nature's way of handling rainwater.
Okay.
So instead of all that water rushing into storm drains and, potentially overwhelming the city system,
Yeah.
they're designing the site to slow it down, spread it out, and let it soak into the ground naturally.
So less concrete jungle, more like a sponge city.
Exactly. They're incorporating things like rain gardens, permeable paving, and bioretention areas,
Oh, wow.
which act like little filters to remove pollutants from the water before it seeps into the ground.
Okay. I'm starting to get the picture.
Mm.
But what makes this LID plan unique to this project? Are these techniques standard practice in Burbank, or is Mariposa Gardens breaking new ground?
It's a combination of both. I think
Okay.
Burbank, like a lot of cities in California, is encouraging these sustainable practices, but each project presents its own set of challenges and opportunities.
Yeah.
What's interesting here is how they're integrating these LID elements into a relatively dense urban development.
Right.
It's not always easy to find the space for, rain gardens and bioretention areas when you're trying to maximize the number of housing units.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
It sounds like they're really trying to walk that tightrope between sustainability and density.
for sure.
Now, I remember seeing a lot of specific requirements in the staff report, not just for the overall LID plan,
Yeah.
but also for things like trash enclosures and even the layout of individual units.
Oh, interesting.
I was struck by how much attention to detail goes into these projects.
It's all part of creating a livable and functional community.
Yeah.
Take the trash enclosures, for example.
Okay.
They might seem like a minor detail,
Right.
but if they're not designed properly, you end up with unpleasant smells, overflowing bins, maybe even rodents.
Yeah. Nobody wants that.
And that's not something anyone wants in their neighborhood, right?
Definitely not.
Yeah.
It's interesting how all these seemingly small decisions can add up to a big impact on the quality of life for residents.
For sure.
Speaking of residents, let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the people who will actually be calling Mariposa Gardens home.
Okay.
Remember, this project received a 100% density bonus because it includes a certain percentage of affordable units.
Right.
But what does affordable actually mean in a city like Burbank, where housing costs are notoriously high?
Yeah.
Who are these units really intended for?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The density bonus program is designed to incentivize developers to include units for very low income and moderate income households.
Okay.
But the definition of affordable varies depending on household size and income level.
Right.
It'd be interesting to see how those affordability thresholds compare to the actual wages of essential workers in Burbank. Teachers, nurses, service industry folks.
Right.
Are these units truly attainable for the people that the city is hoping to reach?
That's a really good point. We often hear about the need for affordable housing.
Yeah.
But it's important to dig deeper and see if those units are actually aligned with the needs of the community.
Absolutely.
It's not just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It's about real people's lives.
Absolutely. And it's about creating a diverse and inclusive community.
Right.
If Mariposa Gardens ends up being populated solely by higher income residents,
Right.
then it hasn't truly achieved its goal of addressing the affordability crisis.
I'm starting to realize that this project is like a microcosm of the larger housing challenges facing California.
Yeah.
We've got this push for density to address the shortage, but also this need to ensure affordability.
Right.
And create a mix of income levels. And then there's the whole environmental piece with cities like Burbank trying to encourage sustainable development practices.
Yeah.
It's a lot to juggle.
You're hitting the nail on the head. And that's what makes this deep dive so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's not just about a single housing development. It's about grappling with the complexities of urban planning and finding ways to create communities that are sustainable, equitable, and livable for everyone.
Good. Before we get too philosophical, let's get back to the details.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about the LID plan and how it manages stormwater.
Right.
But what about other environmental considerations?
Yeah.
Did they just throw in some recycled water and call it a day?
Not quite. They're incorporating a number of other environmentally friendly features.
Okay.
For instance, they're using recycled water for construction, which helps conserve potable water resources.
Right.
And the staff report mentions some requirements for energy-efficient design and appliances.
Makes sense.
They even have to provide electric vehicle charging stations.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like they're trying to tick all the boxes when it comes to sustainability.
It seems like it.
But I'm curious, are these features simply a response to regulations, or is there like a genuine commitment to environmental responsibility?
It's probably a bit of both.
Yeah.
California has some of the strictest environmental regulations in the country.
Right.
So developers have to meet certain standards. But I think there's also this growing recognition that sustainable practices are not just good for the planet.
Right.
They're good for business.
Right.
Energy efficient buildings save money in the long run, and features like EV charging stations can be a real selling point for potential residents.
That's true.
Yeah.
It seems like we're starting to see a shift in thinking where sustainability is becoming less of an afterthought
Yeah.
and more of an integral part of the development process.
I agree. And it's not just about the building itself.
Right.
It's about how the project connects to the larger community.
Okay.
Remember those public amenities we mentioned earlier, the equestrian path and the improved pedestrian infrastructure?
I do.
Those are all part of creating a more walkable, bikeable, and transit-friendly environment.
Right.
Which ultimately reduces reliance on cars and lowers emissions.
So it's all interconnected, right?
Exactly.
The design of the building, the transportation options, the way they manage stormwater, it all contributes to a more sustainable and livable community.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a really interesting question.
Oh.
We've seen how Mariposa Gardens is trying to balance affordability, density, and environmental responsibility.
Right.
But what about the potential downsides?
Oh.
Are there any trade-offs or unintended consequences that we should be aware of?
That's a great question. I'm eager to hear your thoughts on that. That's a great question. You bring up a really good point. I mean, we've been focusing on all the positive aspects of Mariposa Gardens,
Yeah.
but like you said, there are always those trade-offs to consider.
Right.
So what are some of the potential downsides or those unintended consequences that could come with a project like this?
Well, even with the best intentions, there's no such thing as a perfect development.
Right.
And one concern that often comes up with these higher density projects is the impact on traffic and parking.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
40 new units, that means more cars on the road.
Yeah.
And even with measures to encourage alternative transportation, that's something the city has to plan for.
Right. And I imagine that could be a real point of contention for existing residents who might already be dealing with traffic congestion.
For sure.
Are there any strategies in place to mitigate those impacts?
Well, the staff report mentions some requirements for on-site parking,
Okay.
but it also really emphasizes the importance of integrating the project into the existing public transportation network.
Okay.
So they're looking at things like improving pedestrian access to nearby bus stops and potentially even creating dedicated shuttle routes.
Oh, wow.
It's about providing residents with viable alternatives to driving their own cars.
It sounds like they're trying to be proactive.
Yeah.
But it's hard to predict how those strategies will play out in reality.
Yeah.
It's one thing to have those options available, but it's another to actually get people to use them.
Absolutely. Changing people's habits can be a challenge.
Right.
But I think the key is to make those alternatives as convenient and appealing as possible. If it's easier and faster to hop on a bus or walk to your destination than to sit in traffic, people are more likely to make that choice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Now, shifting gears a bit, I'm curious about the long-term affordability of these units.
Okay.
We talked about how those affordability thresholds are set,
Right.
but what happens down the line?
Yeah.
Is there a risk that those units could eventually become market rate and no longer serve the intended population?
That's a valid concern. The affordability restrictions on those units are typically tied to a certain time frame.
Okay.
It could be 15 years, 30 years or even longer.
Okay.
But eventually those restrictions could expire and the units could be sold or rented at market rates.
So it's not a permanent solution to the affordability crisis.
Right,
It's
yeah.
more like a temporary fix.
It's a step in the right direction,
Yeah.
but it's important to recognize its limitations.
Right.
And it highlights the need for, these ongoing efforts to create and preserve affordable housing options. It's not a one-time fix. It's an ongoing challenge that requires, sustained attention and investment.
Absolutely. We've talked about the potential impact on traffic.
Yeah.
The long-term affordability of the units, and the fact that even sustainable development has its limitations.
Yeah.
Are there any other concerns that we haven't touched on?
Well, one thing that's often overlooked in these discussions is the impact on the existing community character.
Oh, okay.
Burbank has a unique identity,
Right.
and new developments, even those designed to blend in, they inevitably bring change.
Yeah.
It's important to be mindful of how those changes might affect the social fabric of the neighborhood.
That's a really thoughtful point. It's not just about bricks and mortar. It's about people's lives and how they experience their community.
Exactly.
And I imagine some residents might welcome the influx of new neighbors and the vibrancy that comes with it,
Right.
while others might feel a sense of loss or displacement.
Exactly. And those feelings are valid. It's about finding ways to balance the need for new housing with the desire to preserve what makes a community special.
Right.
It's a conversation that every city is grappling with as they try to grow and evolve in a sustainable and equitable way.
Yeah, it seems like Mariposa Gardens is like a microcosm of these larger conversations that are happening across California and beyond.
Yeah,
It's a reminder that urban development is such a complex issue
for sure.
with no easy answers.
Absolutely. And as you continue to explore these issues in your own community, I encourage you to keep asking those tough questions.
Right.
What are the trade-offs we're willing to make?
Right?
How do we balance those competing needs and priorities?
Right.
And what kind of future do we want to create for our cities?
Those are fantastic questions to ponder. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but as you said, the conversation doesn't end here. I hope this has given our listeners a deeper understanding of the complexities of urban development and sparked some curiosity about the projects happening in their own neighborhoods.
Yeah, well said. Until next time, keep exploring and keep asking those.
Thank you for watching the latest My Burbank video. If you have it in your heart, please consider helping us by clicking on the super thanks down below. Or even better, go to our channel and consider a membership. Your support is what keeps My Burbank going strong.